Before I begin here, I would just like to note that the CPUC does have an established CCA code of conduct that SE abides by. So the code of conduct prohibits myself from lobbying or marketing against CCA formation. I'm only here to provide factual information about SE's programs and rates, and so that's really my intent here today. It is nothing more than that. I hope to provide factual info that will help you inform your decision making. I'm not here to kind of bias your opinion one way or another. Let's see here. So just to begin, here's a very high-level overview. I think all of us here today kind of understand what CCA is. It's a community choice program that permits cities, counties, joint power authorities to buy and sell electricity on behalf of their customers. There are some details around the program that folks aren't necessarily aware of, so we want to just make that, we just kind of want to bring those to light. So, number one, no matter if you decide to go CCA or not, you always remain an Edison customer in terms of the transmission and distribution services. So that's kind of a key point because there's certain cost implications later on that I'll kind of go into a little bit more detail later on. CCA is an opt-out program. So once the city or community decides to go CCA, all of the customers in its jurisdiction are automatically defaulted into the program, and you have to voluntarily opt out. And so that's an important distinction, simply because it's probably debatable whether that's true customer choice or not, but it obviously has implications in terms of having how folks are enrolled and just the awareness aspect. Number three, the regulatory landscape it's a very fluid environment and dynamic, and so it's, as you kind of go into this decision-making process, it's very important to kind of understand all the regulatory issues that are kind of coming down the pipeline and the decisions that could shape or alter the economics around CCA formation. So here's one very simple example. The commission just recently came down with a decision in late May that they're actually now putting in a hard requirement, so any CCA must post a financial security requirement when they form in the event of a mass involuntary enrollment back to an IOU. So that's like a new requirement or a change in the regs that has just recently come down the pipe, and so there's going to be a minimum $170,000 financial security requirement posting. And then lastly, a lot of folks maybe are not really aware, but SE doesn't earn a profit at all on its energy procurement activities. And so I'll go into a little more detail in the next slide, but there's kind of like three components of our business, and really we earn a rate of return on our transmission and distribution side of the business, but in terms of the energy procurement activities that we do, if I go out and purchase a megawatt of power at $30, that cost is passed straight through our ratepayers, and there's no markup or margin at all in that component of the business. So that's important to understand. Lastly, there were a number of power contracts signed on behalf of all customers way back in the early 2000s as the state was really trying to ramp up their renewables program. There wasn't much of a market, and the state needed to kind of drive demand to create a market, and so Edison and other IOUs were kind of required by the state to go out and sign a number of renewables contracts. And now these contracts are actually underwater simply because the cost of renewables has gone down over time. As technology has improved and manufacturing processes have become more efficient, that cost has come down ever lower and lower. Well, state law actually requires that all remaining customers taking power from SE be indifferent to CCA departures. And so that means that, as customers, choose whether or not they want to depart SE's service, and that's absolutely their right, we just want to ensure a fair cost distribution amongst all remaining customers as well. So there's no cost shifting going on. And that's actually a large issue that's happening right now that there is a regulatory proceeding in the works to try to correct it there. And so that's going to have economic implications as well in terms of decision making. So let me move on to the next slide. Okay, so at a very high level, it's kind of important to understand the value stream of Edison, how Edison makes money. So we have that. You can see here there's that source component. So Edison as a utility, we procure or we produce energy in order to provide to our customers. So that's what we call the generation component of the business. There's a transmission and distribution side. So we take that energy and we relay it across our transmission and distribution network to get that energy to our customers. And the last component, there's kind of like a customer services interaction where we manage a number of customer choice programs such as demand response and energy efficiency. And so an important point to understand is that once again, on that generation component, we don't earn any type of rate of return or profit margin on that. That's just straight pass-through costs. We earn all of our money on in terms of the transmission and distribution component. So we basically raise money by issuing shares. So we raise money from the shareholders. We take that money to invest in our infrastructure, like upgrade our grid, invest in smart meters, poles, things of that nature, and we get a guaranteed rate of return from the commission. So that's important to understand because keep in mind, no matter whether you're a CCA or not, you're always an Edison transmission distribution customer. So that component will always be bundled into your monthly customer bill no matter what. So in terms of what is SCE's perspective on CCA, when you think about that business model, we truly are indifferent between, we definitely support customer choice. We were almost indifferent really between, whether towns decide to go CCA or remain Edison customers. But the big issue is, once again, we want to just ensure equitable cost distribution of all those legacy costs that we've done in the past, and we're really trying to protect the interests of our remaining bundled customers. So a lot of folks like to kind of position this as a SCE versus a CCA battle, but that's not really the case. It's really more of a customer-to-customer issue. We're trying to protect the interests of our remaining bundled customers so that they're not unnecessarily bearing all of these disproportionate costs of all these legacy contract costs in terms of when other customers choose to depart our service. And so I'll kind of walk through that a little bit more. The graph on the very bottom right-hand side of your presentation, that kind of just gives you an example of regardless of whether you go CCA or not, you continue to receive billing services from Edison. So you will continue to receive like a monthly statement from Edison. The only distinction is that if you go CCA, there will be a breakout in these two components. So now you'll have a generation component on your bill that comes from your CCA, and that price and cost is determined from the CCA. And then you're going to always have that remaining transmission and distribution component. So, if you're an Edison customer, you get one bundled rate in your monthly electricity bill, whereas if you go CCA, now it's broken down into two different components. You can kind of see where the costs are coming from. But if you're not necessarily paying that much attention to your bills, folks may not even be necessarily aware that their community or city has gone CCA. So that's important to understand. Once again, I just want to reiterate, we actively support customer choice, whether that's a direct access program, whether that's CCA, whether that's more green rate options for our customers. We support all of these customer choices, but we just want to ensure, all of our customers are treated fairly and equally, number one. And number two, we always want to ensure that grid reliability and safety are maintained, because those are our two foundational values here at Edison. So I will move on to the next slide here. Okay, so in terms of just where do the CCA impact the customer rates? So really, this is the biggest fundamental issue that we're having right now. There are flaws or issues with the current rate structure, and how the exit fees are determined when a city or a community decides to go CCA and they depart our service. The way that the exit fee is calculated, there's just some really fundamental flaws with the current calculation. And so what's happening is that the remaining bundled customers are being left with a disproportionate share of these legacy contract costs that we just talked about. And so, once again, state law requires this. I was in a council meeting maybe a couple weeks ago, and someone kind of made the comment that, at the end of the day, we are a nation of laws. Well, that's really all we're trying to do as a utility. We're trying to enforce a state law which says that there's this indifference principle that remaining bundled customers must be indifferent to CCA departure. And so if you kind of take a look at that graph you guys have in your handouts there on the right-hand side, so let's just kind of use this as an illustration, walk through the process. So you can see because of all these legacy costs going back to like 2000s, and we're procuring renewable energy at like $200 a megawatt hour, and now maybe you look at the markets today, they're trading, these renewable costs are trading around $30 to $40 per megawatt hour. A number of these contracts are underwater. So let's say our SCE average cost is 10.5 cents, or sorry, 10.6 cents in your graph. In a perfect world, if you could kind of get a real good accurate market value of how much these legacy contract costs are worth, we could calculate with pretty good certainty what the above market costs of these contracts were, and we could distribute those above market costs equally across all of our customers, and there wouldn't be any issues. Really the major issue we're seeing right now, though, is that there are currently administratively set benchmarks in terms of that determine the market value of these contracts, and they tend to overstate the value of these legacy contracts. And so, the middle bar kind of shows you what would happen in a perfect world if you could accurately assess the market value of these legacy contracts. And then what's happening is because these administratively set benchmarks are overstating the value of these legacy contracts, what happens is you tend to underestimate the above market costs. Those get distributed to the departing load customers, and then our remaining bundled customers end up eating a disproportionate share, once again, of these costs. And so that's what's going on, and quite honestly, that's probably a big source of like these the economical advantages that some of these CCAs are touting. So that's very important for folks to be aware of. There currently, once again, as I mentioned, there's currently a regulatory proceeding that's meant to address this issue. So there will be changes coming down the pipeline. I can't say what those changes will be or what the impacts are, but it's just very important for folks to be aware of that. And if there's any type of feasibility study being done, make sure that those studies are being updated with the latest numbers and the latest decisions. In some of our estimates, we did some analysis based off the 2016 figures, and so we are estimating that there are about $6 to $7 million of cost shifts going on between departing load customers and remaining bundled customers for every 1% of load departure. And the big issue is that it actually accelerates. As more and more customers depart our load, those cost shifts actually increase at an ever-increasing rate. And that's simply because you have this shrinking customer base trying to spread out like fixed overheads across, and so the problem gets worse and worse and more departing load customers that we get. So that's really why we're trying to correct this the best we can right now. Let's see. Once again, there's a current regulatory proceeding to kind of get these issues resolved, hopefully, and that's, I think, at the end of this month is the latest I've heard from my regulatory team that a proposed decision might be coming down from the commission. So fairly soon, although, that's just going to be a proposed decision, and then I'm sure there's going to be a number of reply, comment periods, and a lot of back and forth, feedback from participants. But hopefully there should be some final decision by the end of this year sometime. It is our hope. Lastly, this is kind of, this slide, there's a lot of numbers here. It could be intimidating. Really, just the main takeaway here is, once again, just to show you, as that percentage of load departure increases, you can see like the cost shifting increases at an ever-escalating, increasing pace. And so that's why this is such a big issue. If you remember, there was a bullet on my very first point that states that approximately 70% of our load is looking at or considering CCA. Well, it's because, as that percentage of load departure occurs, you're going to see like ever-increasing levels of cost shifting going on. And so that's a serious issue. Lastly, we just really wanted to make the point that at the end of the day, I think the state has set very lofty, ambitious environmental goals for us all. They're basically looking at trying to get down to 80% GHG emissions reductions versus 1990 levels by 2050. So that's a super lofty goal. Edison actually has a plan to get there. We're doing our best to get there, though, in a methodical manner, such that we ensure grid reliability and safety. Once again, those are two foundational values. We're trying to make sure we do this in a methodical and informed manner. But we have a long-term plan to get there. We're looking at basically step number one, trying to decarbonize the grid. We're trying to get to 80% decarbonized grid by 2030. So basically clean up the grid, step number one. Step number two, try to electrify the transportation industry. And that's because the transportation sector accounts for about 40% of all GHG emissions across the state. So they're by far the largest contributor of GHG emissions. So we're trying to electrify that sector. And then lastly, try to electrify space and water heating in buildings. So we kind of have like a three-pronged approach: long-term solution to try to hit those state set targets. And you can see we're planning to invest a lot of money in the grid to upgrade things, clean up the grid. We have a clean fuel rewards program that we provide money to EV customers to try to incentivize the adoption of EVs. Once again, talking about electrifying the transportation sector. And then you can see in 2017 we were actually at 46% in terms of the power that we delivered to the grid, clean power that we delivered to the grid. So we're well on pace for that. We're making a number of investments to the grid and our environment. That's really all I had for today. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to say and answer.
Any questions? Comments?
I have a few questions. So when it comes to the super hot days when we have rolling blackouts and the flex alerts, et cetera, how do you determine who gets that when you're in a CCA or if it's straight from Edison?
It actually is going to work. There would be no process change from how things work today. So basically what would happen is if you decide to go CCA, your CCA is going to procure energy for you instead of the utility, meaning SE in this case. You would bid that source of energy into the CAISO grid. At that point, it's on the grid to kind of manage that power and distribution. So if there's some type of rolling blackout or issues due to a transmission outage or something like that, a line derate, it's going to be the grid that's basically determining,
So our particular area, it will be everyone in the area, not like, my neighbor is not going to do it, so his electricity will be on and mine will be on.
Absolutely not, yeah,
Just
right.
making sure.
Yeah, so that's going to be on the transmission and distribution side, and once again, even if you decide to go CCA, you don't get away from that at the end of the day.
And I was wondering, can you explain to us, and I want everyone in here to understand, but purchasing power,
Yep.
it's like the rest of our utilities, right? We purchase water, we could purchase gas. How does someone get it cheaper than the other guy? I need to understand that.
Yeah, so here's where, I'm going to try to stick to the facts and information as much as I possibly can. If I veer off, please correct me. But here's where I've heard a number of kind of myths, truths, or half statements being issued. So a number of questions I've heard posed to the CCAs is, how can you guys be more price competitive versus SoCal Edison? And invariably, the answer or response is something along the lines of, A, we're a nonprofit, so we don't have profit margins. We're padding into our costs. B, we're smaller and more nimble. Well, I just kind of explained to that notion of the nonprofit aspect doesn't really hold, right? Because on a generation component for energy procurement activities, there's no profit margin whatsoever. That's straight pass through. I will say, sure, there may be advantages to being smaller and more nimble to Edison, absolutely. But at the same time, there's always trade-offs that you're making, right? If you have a larger company with a larger balance sheet, you have much better economies of scale, you have a stronger balance sheet, you have more purchasing power. There's always going to be trade-offs. It's kind of like, would you rather be a Costco or a little mom and pop shop? And there's no clear advantage one way or another. You're always making trade-offs. But what happens a lot of times is, I think some organizations may tend to present one side of the argument, and they don't kind of present the whole complete picture. And so that's, I just want to say, there's always trade-offs. I don't think there's any clear winner or loser, but just folks need to understand the trade-offs that they're willing to make. So hopefully that answers your question. But once again, if we get the legacy cost issue fixed, so there's equitable cost distribution amongst all of our customers, then going forward, if you think about it, there really should be no competitive advantage between a CCA and Edison, because we're both competing in the same competitive market. When we go out in the wholesale power markets, there's a competitive market. There's a bid and ask offer. I basically need to buy my power at the prevailing market rate, and so do the CCAs. They can't magically get a better rate than Edison. Edison can't magically get a better rate than them. I think we're both competing in the same competitive markets. So really, the largest fundamental cost advantage right now is this flawed exit fee structure that I just discussed.
Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, Stan, and appreciate you trying to take the complex subject and simplify it for us. The question I have is, you have more and more people now are going with solar. Some people are buying their own solar panels. Some people are getting into like 20-year lease agreements with solar companies. And understandably, all of their power still comes through the Edison grid. But those, for example, those that have a lease, they're making a payment to the solar company, which in turn then pays Edison for that. Is there any impact one way or the other on those kinds of customers that are, and I'm talking primarily residential customers that are, they're still using the Edison grid, and they're basically generating power that gets put into the grid, although with the weather we're having right now, we're probably not keeping up. So from your perspective, do you see any differentiation between those customers, whether they go CCA or opt to stay with SCE?
At a high level, what I can tell you is there shouldn't really necessarily be any real impact, because like you mentioned, you're always going to be connected to the grid, and you're going to be an Edison transmission and distribution customer. One important distinction to understand, though, is that CCAs are allowed to they're allowed to set their own rate structures, however they deem, and that could be completely different from the utility. They could be trying to incentivize certain types of behaviors. They actually have that flexibility to set their own rate structures, so that could impact their rates if you have like a solar panel and a solar array on top of your roof. Additionally, they are allowed to institute new and different types of demand response and energy efficiency programs. So there could be, depending on what types of programs they institute, there could be pros and cons once again. So it's not an easy question to answer, but it really is going to come down to what the CCAs decide to do. So it's tough for me to kind of just give you a straight black and white response.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, I've got.
So many entities now purchase power for reasoning of saving or incentives or whatever the case may be.
Sure.
I know the company I work for certainly does, to take advantage of those incentives and savings. And they're lucky to have that choice.
Absolutely.
I think it would be far-reaching to say that people don't appreciate having the benefit of a choice. I mean, as far as best to have a choice than not have a choice. Best to make a decision that's good for you versus just something that you have to adhere to because that's what's available. So I believe that local control is always better than not. Currently, customers have no vote as to how the rate is set or structured. I think the staff report speaks for itself on the benefit of CCAs, and I appreciate having the ability to be able to make that choice and opt out if I choose to at a later date. In any event, we can always pull back before the actual launch, and if we feel necessary. I don't think, I'm not aware of one entity who has created a CCA or belonged to a CCA that has been disappointed in their decision. So there may be some. I've certainly checked, and I haven't come across any as yet. So I think it's a benefit to our community to be able to make their own choice and not just be stuck with something they think they have to be stuck with. That's my sense.
Thank you for your presentation.
Okay.
I appreciate that. I do have a couple questions. You had mentioned that 70% of Edison's customers are currently have the opportunity to go into a CCA?
They're just
In
either
areas
considering or in the
Right, right.
stage of implementing CCA.
And I think that, and you had mentioned about the power purchase agreements that Edison has, these long-term agreements, and they're costly and they're underwater.
Yep.
What I think that this might be an opportunity for Edison is that as more communities go on to a CCA, that it gives Edison the opportunity to try to renegotiate their long-term contracts, since legally they're mandated to not spread that to the remaining customers. Did I hear that correctly, that you can't spread that additional cost to the remaining customers?
No, I'm just saying that the current way that the exit fee structure is calculated, meaning how we currently distribute costs to departing load customers, is basically overestimating, or it's underestimating the above average cost of these legacy contracts. And so effectively you have the remaining bundled service customers subsidizing the cost of departing load customers is effectively happening.
So this may, again, it may be an opportunity for Edison to go back and try to renegotiate their long-term contracts to get that cost down, considering that the cost of energy production as far as solar and that has gone down.
Yeah, unfortunately, like that, we don't really have that built. It's almost kind of like, I guess the analogy would be if you sign a lease contract for a car, for like you sign like a 5-year lease on a car, and then all of a sudden 3 years down the road you decide, hey, this lease is too expensive. You know, you go like the supply of cars has gone way up, and the prices have come down, and you decide, hey, this thing is way too expensive. I want to get out of it. Unfortunately, you've signed this long-term contract, and so you could renegotiate with your counterparties, but typically they're going to ask for some type of price concession, right? They're not going to just give away free money, and so that's unfortunately that's how things work today. We're kind of locked into like these long-term 30, 40-year power purchase agreements, and you know, if we were to flip them, the only way we could get out of these contracts if we were to basically either buy out the contract from the opposite counterparty or try to sell them in the marketplace at a much markedly lower price.
Sure. And then you had mentioned that the state, Edison's doing a great job to try to keep up with the lofty goals of the state to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and all that.
Yeah.
And I applaud Edison for that because I think that's a good thing. The problem is that the population by 2050 is going to be exponentially higher than it is today, considering that in 1990, the population was 29 million, and today it's 30 million, and we're only at 2017. And so those people are going to create a large demand, and it's going to take a lot of production to be able to keep up with that demand.
Well, you'd be actually surprised if you kind of look at our load profile over time, like over the last 10 years. Edison's load profile, even though you're absolutely right, the population of the state has grown, but the other fact that's happening is that you have energy efficiency gains that are basically offsetting a lot of that. So, you know, a lot of the energy efficiency programs that we're starting to institute, there's new regulations in terms of energy efficiency requirements for new houses, new commercial buildings. All these types of things are basically increasing energy efficiency, and they're basically offsetting that population growth that you're seeing. So over time, our load growth has remained remarkably steady.
All right. Very good.
Okay. Thanks for your time.
No other questions, comments? All right. All right, we're going to take a short recess to our 7 o'clock meeting.